Hello, everyone, and PGL have asked all of us here to assemble this great meeting of minds to talk about 2020's Counter-Strike year and what 2021 might look like. Now, as you can see on your screen, we haven't spared any expense. We've brought in all of the greatest minds. We've got the esports historian, Duncan Thorin Shields, probably a future Hall of Famer and a Lifetime Achievement Award recipient. Maybe one day, if you can dial down that controversy like I have, maybe you two can get an award, Duncan. Below him, somewhere, we have future Hall of Famer commentator, August Semmler Massenat.
You're looking hell.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. I really do. And, of course, future Hall of Famer Counter-Strike player, now Valorant pro. He's left us, lads.
Okay.
Christopher Get Right Allison.
Confirmed.
So,
have I really?
That's the word on the street, brother. So I don't even know why you're here to talk about Counter-Strike, really. You should go and hang out with your new paymasters.
Probably the only game where they let him off.
So, look, let's start then. We want to talk about what happened across 2020. It was a strange year, not just for Counter-Strike, for the whole world, I would say. And certainly all esports. And naturally, these things filtered into our scene and sort of created a sort of strange landscape for everybody. And we ended up, I think, moving into 2020 with a great sense of optimism. Obviously, there's no getting away from sort of talking about the global pandemic and how it affected the whole year, and in particular, LAN tournaments and just the direction of CS in general. So I'll start by asking you about that. Pretty disappointed with how 2020 went, or were we kind of looking at some of the efforts to salvage the scene and feeling, actually, you know what? Compared to some of the esports and some other industries, we did pretty good.
You can't get away from saying that we did pretty good compared to some other industries that have been completely annihilated, right?
Yeah.
Like, film, TV, even sports for most of the year, they all just got wrecked utterly. Whereas we were able to pivot into one of our strengths, which is the fact that, we can still carry out our tournaments online. And so even on LAN with Flashpoint 1, where we thought we were utterly screwed when all this started kicking off with the lockdowns, we were able to pivot on the spot there and turn it into an online broadcast. It doesn't matter if everything is on fire. An esports production is going to find a way to make it happen.
For sure. I mean, just looking like how they can come up with a solution, like surely they affected a lot when Flashpoint 1 came there and everything just became like shut down in US there, and every team has to play from, the Airbnbs or hotels or whatever. They need to figure it out, to continue playing the tournament. In a good way, when you look at like the whole pandemic situation, it's been a horrible year for most of the people around the world, with affecting people, families, friendships, and all that kind of stuff, and even people losing, lives and all that kind of things. But seeing how, the group of CS, where everyone is always each year that goes by saying, the game is going to go downhill from here with other games coming up and all that kind of stuff, and just seeing how the strength comes there, it's just beautiful, you ask me, and especially for someone that's been here forever. I mean, everyone has been here forever. It's just amazing to see that everyone getting connected and getting even more people that's never been interested or into it as well.
I think the trouble for me is it's like, ultimately, I can't say it was bad overall, because as you say, we basically pivoted and did all the tournaments online. We still had the tournaments, people still got paid. Even if it had just been like 2 LANs, if you could have just made them like, one in August and one in December. If we could have somehow done that so that it was building into something, or you got a moment where someone could like prove themselves offline, that would have made it like 50% better in terms of how it feels in terms of the actual Counter-Strike. Because the downside is, the upside of being able to have all the tournaments also fed into the downside of it did feel, especially those last 3 months, like every day you just woke up like, what tournament is it today? Oh, same team's playing. And like, I've never been someone who complained about oversaturation when it was on LAN, but online, I actually really did feel like a lot of the oversaturation part, like even though some of the matches were still great, it was a bit rough to see like the same 4 teams play like every week or two.
Yeah, I think that was a problem. I think the online CS, the problem with it is just the logistics, because like you say, we can do it all online. The one thing we can't do is have a team on one side of the world play a team on the other side of the world because of the...
Yes, that was brutal as well.
That was the problem, that you, as you rightly say, we ended up seeing the same teams play each other over and over again. I think the audience did get a little bit of fatigue with that.
Do you think that led to the detriment of the North American scene as well, the accelerated decline? The fact that then all of a sudden you're on islands everywhere. You have the CIS region, but the CIS region can still play with the European region, even though they have qualifiers that are playing. So it's like you have CS teams playing against CIS teams, and then they get to play into these bigger European tournaments. And then you have NA over. They're like Australia. There was a long period there where NA was just basically getting utterly dominated, not even by North Americans, but by South Americans.
Yeah.
They didn't even have that.
Well, I definitely think it was a factor. I don't know what Duncan and Christopher think. I mean, there's esports is essentially, while it is a sport on a very real level, it's also an entertainment business. And I think when you don't have that same level of excitement about the product anymore, because you're seeing Team Liquid play Evil Geniuses for the 8th time, in 2 months. I think there was probably a lot of esports fans in NA that were like kind of maybe looking over, and I think it was a factor. I just don't know how big a factor.
No, listen, like if you look at NA is basically the extreme example of what I said with the oversaturation, because you're absolutely right. Like, basically, when all the teams were even in NA, it was still the same top 4 almost every tournament. And so, like, I remember there was one point in time where EG had that crazy streak, I think it was in like August or something, where they had like the 16 map winning streak. And I went online and I looked it up, right? And I'm not joking. All of the wins were just against like Genji, might have been like Cloud9 and EG or Furia EG. Like, it was literally just 3 teams. They just played like back to back to back to back to back. Like, this is crazy, guys. Like, no matter how much you love online CS, that's too much. And I think the other side as well that is brutal is the fact that the regions couldn't play, like you said, ended up being way more significant than you'd think. Like, it's not just that they couldn't compete against each other. It ruined the narratives, because over in NA, you had the 2 teams that did the best overall, was like Furia in the first half of the year, and then EG had that amazing run. Like, I think it was just after the play break, if I'm remembering correctly. I'm trying to get my time frame right. It might have been just before. But whenever these 2 teams were at their peak, right, everyone obviously did the what if shadow box, like what would happen if they played Vitality or Na'Vi or Astralis. And the problem is this: they did play them, but months later. So when they finally came to Europe and played the Blast tournament, everyone was like, see, it was just fake all along, and they were never good. It's like, think about how normal CS works. There could be a team that's number 1 in March that by September is like number 7. Like, that doesn't even necessarily actually translate. But I feel like, unfortunately, that ties the 2 issues together. The fact that people thought, well, these teams just basically play 3 other teams and then a couple of like underdogs, and then they've come and had 1 chance in Europe and they didn't make it. That means they weren't good. So unfortunately, it basically invalidated results anywhere except Europe. So in some ways, it set CS back in terms of like the history of the game, and that's it. Because one of the coolest things about CS was we really made it like a pretty global game, considering it's not a MOBA.
Yeah.
I mean, for sure. I mean, just looking when finally the teams came over from NA, Furia especially, when they're a very exciting team to watch. Like, they come up with things that we're not used to, because it feels like at the end of the day, like for so many years you've been watching CS, it's basically the same. It's small things there and there, but it's not a big thing. Astralis is a huge, like, big factor in a team that actually does a lot of changes, but it's more the things that we've seen it before, but they just take it another step with it. Furia does, the complete opposite of doing that, coming up with new things that we haven't seen before. And when seeing them coming over to Europe and finally competing, Liquid both and Furia, like, it made me again like being more motivated watching the games again, because of such a long time period when we haven't seen those 2 teams play against the European teams.
Yeah, I think, the one good thing that sort of come out of it is that we sort of do have a better understanding about which organizations and which teams are sort of fully committed, and we are going to see more of in 2021, because we've essentially had to distill ourselves down to 1 geographical region. So, when you see teams like Evil Geniuses, a huge brand, teams like Team Liquid, a huge brand, sort of commit and say, listen, we're going to move our team to Europe so we can keep supporting Counter-Strike, that is a little bit affirming, even though I would say what's happened to NA, which we'll talk about a little bit later on in the show, I think that is a cause for concern, but it hasn't done as much damage as it could have done, because we've had some big brands at least commit in a very profound way.
By the way, on that topic, the NA one, for all that everyone is laughing at Cloud9 and they're like the object of mockery all the time, because everyone knows they spent the millions because they were public with it, and Henry made all those big proclamations, how could simultaneously people be like, morons, Cloud9 spending millions for a CS team, and then the same fan go, just wipe my brain, Orgs are leaving NACS. What is this? Don't you believe in the game? It's like, listen, guys, come on, be reasonable. Like, I understand. I can make fun of that Cloud9 in isolation, but in light of what Richard's saying there, in a world where all these other orgs are just leaving and basically going to other games or just saying, I'm just going to reduce my investment to almost nothing, I actually think that is significant, because what it suggests is Cloud9 didn't spend that money to cancel the team 1 month in. Like, that suggests they want to be here for years and be a proper big player again. So they might not have the lineup now. You can definitely disagree with that, but the actual move itself was a massive positive. Like, that's like a rare beacon towards the end of the year when a lot of other things with orgs were going downhill.
It just makes me wonder what kind of what their war chest looks like, because you've got other teams, that are up and coming teams that are clearly struggling in NA, and NA again, biggest marketing budgets, always has been in esports, right?
Yes.
That's why the focus is in North America. You just get you unlock the coffers and you get all of those gold coins, right? And so when you got Cloud9, is it them just flexing, saying, yeah, we've got the deep pockets here, lads, no worries. Whereas you've got Triumph, Chaos, these guys who are just struggling behind, saying Chaos just straight up dropping their roster, aren't they? Just saying we can't keep up. The budget isn't there, and it's too costly to maintain a Counter-Strike team in North America right now.
Actually, one thing I want to ask Richard, because he'll know like this information, but I'm not sure on, is I know some of the NA orgs, like some really big ones even, it was rumored that they basically took those loans that the US government gave, where it was like,
the PPP
you didn't have to
loans,
pay back. Yeah, like in that scenario, that's also what makes it so weird. Like, as you said, this isn't just like an individual org happens to be in NA and they happen to say, well, I just don't want to be involved in Counter-Strike anymore. I'm just not interested in it as a game or in it. No, it seems to me like, if anything, NA almost had like a hedge against some of the issues this year. So to me, them leaving is just basically like a sign that they have no faith in where the industry is in CS right now.
I totally agree with that. And I think, the one thing you have to say is that that kind of thought that can spread like a bushfire, right? I mean, if you see one organization sort of gearing up and dropping a team or dropping a CS:GO division or taking loans to make ends meet, and their CEO is publicly saying we got problems, then these things spread. I mean, we've seen it before. The dead game meme can be very quickly memed into reality once a perception takes hold, and investors that maybe don't know the space can get a little bit nervous if they hear rumblings and rustlings about how well the scene's doing potentially. So I think it is very important when a team like Evil Geniuses actually nips rumors in the bud. I mean, I think that's like the first time I've seen an organization in CS come out to publicly quell rumors of them dropping their CS division and saying we are going to commit to having a team in 2021 and we look forward to getting back to competition. So you're right. I think at the end of the year, we did get some kind of positives, come up. Like there was a defiant, if you like, kind of a, resolution from some of the big names that they weren't going to go the same way as some of the pretenders and maybe get into a game that's a little bit easier to get into right now. There is another good thing to talk about, and that is, of course, 2020 was the year we got this incredible rivalry that definitely captured a lot of imaginations and was very exciting for all of us. And that was obviously the Simple ZywOo rivalry. We're watching two of the best players that have ever touched the game competing for trophies at the same time. Probably in a way that hasn't happened before since the old Counter-Strike 1.6 days.
Yes.
So I think that's worth sort of addressing. And maybe even getting into the debate, which me and Duncan have already had. But
I listened to it. I liked listening to that one. That was a really great episode of By the Numbers.
Thanks, dude. So let's start there. Who was the greatest player in 2020? Was it Simple? Was it ZywOo?
Simple.
Is there anyone else that should be in contention for that discussion?
Yeah, you can do a writing if people want. They don't have to pick those two, obviously.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. Actually, the timing is interesting because like a few days back we saw that S tier kind of Maui released this that tier list where he was kind of going up there, and Device was up there but just beneath Simple ZywOo. Interesting discussion to be had there, I thought. But I mean, to me it's all about intangibles and it's all about Simple. ZywOo, when I think of ZywOo and I think of Simple, I'm like, okay, they're pretty much equal. Now let's think about the environment that they're playing in. And to me, ZywOo is just, there's no comparison. ZywOo just has a superior environment in terms of like team culture, in terms of pedigree of the players that he's playing with. You got guys like Shoxy, like Apex, and you've got this coach Xtaz, who's some wizard who just managed to figure out how to rejuvenate the French scene in the span of a year, which is absolutely mind-blowing considering how much of a struggle those guys have been going through for so long now. So, I mean, think of all of that environment for ZywOo, and so he is that star in that environment, able to put those numbers up. And then you have Simple over here, where he's got fresher players, roster changes, changes, weird stuff going on with the coaching side as well. Unlike Na'Vi, in an environment where it's all sorts of weird in terms of the CIS competition, he's got all of that going against him, and yet he is still able to post those numbers day in, day out. So just in terms of the environment, that's where I'm going to base my argument. Just in terms of the environment, to have Simple still be able to put up that kind of performance given the environment in comparison to Zewo's environment, that's what sets him above for me. That's what makes him the number one of the year.
On this particular debate, I personally think it's one of those ones where it's like they are 1A and 1B, kind of like the mouse Nick example you gave. It's like basically you just pick your flavor. Which do you prefer?
Sure.
Like, you know, there's no wrong answer. It's just you have your own reasons. So I'm actually interested to know if Get Right would pick one of those too, because often I know he has a different philosophy on like the team aspect of the game. Maybe he has a different player he wants to pick for this. Would you pick Get Right?
I mean, if you're going to compare those two, because 2020 was the year of the battle of those two, basically, when you look like through the whole year, surely, like, if I must pick someone of them, I probably would say Saivu. I mean, I know and love to watch Simple play. Like, I really forward to see him play. But what Saivu does, and so many times, like multiple beautiful things through the games, it's just something that just stands out every time, if you ask me. But then in the end of the day, if you ask me, because I'm always a person go against everyone, what they're talking about. And I would always like go with Device. In the end of the day, like, surely he hasn't performed with the team because of the struggle with other roster changes that they had and all that kind of stuff. Surely he wasn't up for that debate for that year, if you look through it. But when you look through all the years and all that kind of stuff, we must starting, praising him more than, we already done, if you ask me. Because, people has been praising me for my career and how I was one of the consistent one, like in the 1.6 and the beginning of Cisco and all that kind of stuff. Device is taking it to the next level, if you ask me. Like, it's just remarkable to see it. And it's because, like, surely I have the opportunity and the pleasure of actually meeting him and know him a little bit to some extent. And it's just amazes me how, like, strongly he is as an individual person. And he actually goes, sometimes even against his health, which I've done through my career, and actually perform to the level he does, Now he seems to, like, have it under control, so it's not probably that debate anymore. But, like, just looking and comparing, those three players just beneath them. If you want to be watching an exciting game and seeing flashy plays and all those beautiful moments with Saivu is winning, that 1v4 clutch with the P250 on Mirage, in the last game against Na'Vi there, with like 2 HP left. That's just a beautiful magical number of seeing how great of a player is. And I mean, in a way, he's the chosen one because he was born when CS got released.
Sure, yes.
But just look on Device. Come on, like, end of the day, like, no one can take anything away from him, if you ask me.
Yeah, the problem I have with that whole discussion is, unfortunately, the reason why it's actually become just Simple and Zero. Listen, I will say the eye test is amazing. They look obviously fantastic to play, but it's that they're both stats monsters. So since everyone in CS loves stats, like, the number's higher, so it has to be one of these two. Like, the reason I don't even hear the inclusion of someone like Device, if they have a reason, like what Get Right gave there, like consistency, how many years he's done it through, is because I'd contrast it like this. Obviously, most people watching this probably know, like, European soccer, right? So I'll use that as the analogy point for once. And what I'll say is this. It's easy to look at, like, Ronaldo and Messi when they score all the goals, when they break the records, when they're always, like, winning the golden boot. Anyone can say they're the best. Like, almost the metrics of the game have. But the problem is, if you pick a player, like, I think a classic example would be like Zidane. Zidane never scored the most goals. Probably never even scored the most goals on his team. But the point is, that's a player where the numbers don't tell you how good that player was. He's having all sorts of impact that's invisible unless you watch the game. So I don't hate the pick of Device on that one. Obviously, he's a totally unique playing style. And basically, no one can do what he can do in his own way. He's not just going to frag 40 frags every time, but he's got his own unique strengths. Someone's phone's near the monitor, I think. It's you, Richard.
Sorry, mate.
What year is it?
It's all right. He's the only person I've seen.
What is this?
It was such a long time. I was like, what is that shit now again?
My bad.
Whoa.
Forgot the, golden rule. Turn your phone off when you're live broadcasting.
That's amazing, dude. I haven't. Wow. Okay.
I think you have more to say, though, Sablon.
I think that's probably a good way to finish it.
It's so they can edit it back without that fuck up in there.
It's all part of it, man. If it comes,
I'm happy to have it in. Whatever. Makes me look like a rank amateur.
By the way, one thing I would just say, because obviously we're like one eye's looking at 2020, but one eye's looking at 2021. Obviously, I would just say this: if you're a fan, for all the fans out there doing the thing that fans always do, where when you want like one of the two, you just ride super hard for that guy, and the other guy, you don't just say, well, he's second best. You say he sucks or he's not good or whatever. I tell you right now, right? anyone who's
strange
like
and
a
familiar.
Zimu fan and you're watching Simple going, he's overrated or whatever, like, you should cherish this moment in time, because actually your reference to 1.6 was right, Richard. When I used to follow 1.6, and Get Right could probably speak to this, when I used to be in the era when like every tournament you knew Neo and Forrest and like the greatest players would just, it was like they were just competing themselves for the MVP half the years. When those years happen, you don't realise until you get a year where there is no dominant player, where there is no key rivalry, or where there's one player who's just weird, like Simple in 2018 when he was just up here and everyone else was here. Like, you have to appreciate like the truly great rivalries when they're real and they're in the moment, because they won't last forever. I know these two players look like they will, because that's a testament how insane they are, but you just think they'll do it forever. But history tells you normally get a year or two of that. You don't get 15 years of that, you know.
Well, look, the other thing is, and I guess it's a good little segue, is, I mean, the awesome rivalry was one of the silver linings in 2020. Mm-hmm. Can we think of any other silver linings in 2020? I mean, we did talk a little bit as well about at the end of the year, you know, Team Liquid Evil Geniuses, you know, kind of standing by the game. Can we think of anything else to add to the pile?
I mean, I think it's quite interesting to see the CS region to actually take a stand and really pointed themselves out to be a very strong region. Like, for so long, people, you know, especially during the majors when they changed the system, you know, CS get their own qualifiers, all kind of stuff. They're like, they'll have Navi, basically. Mm. That's been the talk for years, you know, at least in the beginning. Now we actually started to see, you know, teams like Spirits. We even seen Gambit, which were Gambit youngsters before. Now they're the main team. And Hobbit joining the guys, you know, they're taking a stand and showing themselves out there. You know, that I think that's a pretty cool thing to see. Surely they're always going to come to the end where everyone's going to talk. It's online and all that kind of stuff. But you have to appreciate, because we actually got the opportunity to see games through the whole year, because it could have been like in other traditional sport when nothing happened. And like you're saying, like Thorin, we already had and cherished the moment of two superstar players battling it out. And people were like, oh, well, Heroic was there. They're number one. Big was number one. And you're having Cadian as like one of the most flashier player and all that kind of stuff. And all praise to them, because that was a beautiful thing to see. I'm not going to say it was horrible to see not Navi or, you know, Vitality winning. Sure. It was nice to see that kind of a mixture thing, to see those other teams also winning. But like the CS region has been one of the things that stand out for me the most in 2020. We look comparing them, even in the tier 2 scene, when most of the people are watching CS, they're not really taking attention to that or paying attention to it. But for me, who loves to see CS, I watch a lot of games. I watch a lot of different tiers. You know, I don't care if it's just tier 1, you know, only. And for me, it's just, it blows my mind when I really look into those teams and like seeing like, there actually could be a huge potential here for real this time. And I think that's going to be one of the things that I'm looking forward the most to 2021, if you ask me.
I'm going back and I'm trying to like relive those moments. And the first moment when we had this massive upset at the beginning of the year, and that just blew all of our minds, was Complexity. And so I was just clicking through, you know, just like reliving some of that right now, just because of the insane explosion onto the scene that Complexity and Jason Lake had again. You know, like that's the crazy thing.
That was some movie level stuff.
Exactly right. I was just saying, I was just reliving like this actually happened this year. That's right. Complexity, like holy at the beginning of the year, they come out of nowhere, and we just spent so much time talking about Device and Astralis and singing their praises. They got clocked. Complexity comes out of nowhere and just blindsides Astralis and blows up onto the scene in that fashion. And then they not only that, they managed to actually stay competitive throughout the year. We have another player in North America, at least as far as the organization is concerned. They do seem to be focusing a bit on Europe, obviously, right now with how things have gone with the Rona. But like to have Jason Lake and Complexity bringing that kind of power into it, I guess, that kind of money, because like they are backed by the Dallas Cowboys. That's big for us as a scene. That's big for us as an industry. And then for them to get results in CSGO as well. I was actually quite pleased with that, remembering that, Complexity, man, that's sick that they're back in the mix. It's really cool to see. So for me, that's probably one of my big silver linings for this year.
So look, just one last bit of this general 2020 review, then we're going to move on to something a bit more specific. Obviously, worst parts of 2020, that was on the show rundown. Now, coronavirus, we've got that out the way, I would say.
Sure.
Yeah.
There were one or two more elements I think worth talking about. 2020 was also the year of the cheat in a lot of ways, wasn't it? We had obviously cheating scandals kind of come out about coaches that were using bugs. We are being told by ESIC, the investigatory body that discovered that there might be some more coming and some more. And these weren't small name coaches. These were some of the coaches with some of the biggest teams, you know. and people who were tenured former players as well being embroiled in this. And on top of that, match fixing has reared its head again. And there's lots of talk about players maybe escaping justice by moving across to another game where realistically there would be no purview, no remit to sort of hold them accountable for actions in another game. So that, for me, I just want to mention that and talk about it briefly, because I think that was a really, really disappointing part of 2020 for me.
I mean, for sure. I mean, since I was still competing, in 2020, and then you're seeing, the news of everyone, like the coaches and some of them are close friends of mine as well, seeing, their names popping up there. I think I even tweeted out, I feel shamed to the bone, because like those are people, because the community, the professional scene, they're very close by, it's a very close connected group, because you meet each other on the road so many times, you hang out and you get to know each other pretty well. And some of them you're like getting shocked by and seeing those kind of names come up to it. But then at the same time, like one of the things that sticks out, like not to take anything away from that, but like you're saying, more of this whole thing that people are, giving up games and doing that kind of stuff, like rig the games, is starting to pop up even more and more. That's something like I thought we were over with. Like, surely it's always going to be there in the dark. Lucky for us, we have Richard Lewis and Thorin actually talking about it and actually bringing it up more and more. So thanks to you guys for doing that, because it is a very important topic to discuss more and actually really look into depth. And finally, we actually start to see some sort of a change to it when you look through like Australia, people getting banned and all that kind of stuff. But you shouldn't be in the end of the day, if you ask me, if you were a CS player and you did those kind of things and you go to another game, you shouldn't just go unpunished, if you ask me. It doesn't make any sense. Maybe I'm wrong with saying that, and maybe I feel like one of those stupid person maybe people think of me when I'm saying that. But in the end of the day, like I've been here forever. I've been there and been one of the harsh truth and saying maybe I'm some cocky to that, but like one of the pioneers to actually build up the scene. And I've been fighting myself and my whole career for being, honest and very, not a cheating person. I don't want to see someone taking advantage of that because of the scene has become bigger and better in that way, because that was my dream. Now everyone else is following it and I see it and it's beautiful to see, but I don't want to see anyone else is saying like, you can actually rig a game and actually make even more money doing those things. Like, come on, bro, like get out of my scene. That's what I would say.
Yeah,
I also think as well, like that stuff was like, I know this is like a side angle, but it was also just in such bad taste when you consider what other people's jobs are like in the real world in 2020, that there are players getting paid a lot of money, coaches getting like mad. We're talking like people getting 5 figures a month, 6 figures a month, and they're potentially ruining the entire integrity of the game, where, as we said earlier in this episode, that was one of the real positives of the year, was that we still can have competition and in our minds go, let's treat it like this is a real match and this is still ESO and cloning nuts online, like let's act as though, in history, yes, it'll have an asterisk, but for now let's get excited, let's watch it. But then if you know that people are cheating, even not just the whole coaching bug thing, the stream sniping thing was depressing as well, because the other thing about that was, like Get Right said, it's one thing if it's always going to be there, like someone's going to do that, someone shady, right? But what killed me was when it was the people who actually, I can confirm, are cool people, like people I have met and had many conversations with and dealt with in other scenarios where they weren't cheaters, they wouldn't do something like that. That's probably the most disappointing thing. It's that some of the names on those lists, I consider myself usually a pretty good judge of character. I would have bet against a lot of those names being on there. Certain ones, yeah, obviously. So, like, how widespread it was as well. It's just like, there's something just depressing about the human condition that people thought that was reasonable to do in this year of all years, for fuck's sake.
So is this like professional cycling or whatever, right? Like Tour de France level thing, where it's just, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. And everybody's doing it at the elite level. Isn't that the excuse that they made to justify their actions? Why are we going to compete? We can't compete. They're all doing it, so we have to do it because otherwise we're just going to lose by default, right?
Yeah, people were trying to imply.
They're trying to imply it that way, right?
And we can't catch them, then we got to do it, which is kind of a bullshit angling.
Dude, Duncan, you saw my reaction. We were over at Flashpoint. I mean, we were essentially just debating dropping nukes on the entire scene and just say, all right, done, get them out, get rid of them, get rid of everybody who's cheated, get rid of them, and we start fresh. And then we'll have integrity at least. Then when people tune in, they know this is a straight up tournament. Everybody left is legit, and we just start over.
Semmler, I'm sure it's not a big deal if I say this because you'll appreciate like the humorous angle to it. But like,
I tend to appreciate your humorous angle.
Most people, obviously, because again, actually, kind of like Garrett said, because some of these people are our friends, the people actually we don't want to get punished. So like the people who we hope they can overcome their issues and just admit it, etc. But this way, Semmler was very much on the other side of that, just being like Semmler's like the Punisher or something. Because when this incident happened, he's referring to, he was just coming in like, so we're going to disqualify them from the entire tournament. Like, what? No, what? Whoa, Semmler, calm down, boy. We'll probably have to give them some sort of punishment. Maybe we take a veto from them. He was just like, so are we kicking him out the whole competition? He was like scorched earth instantly.
I did go, dude. I spent an hour just going back and forth with Anders in the gym that morning. I was just like, so that's it. We're done, right? We got him on camera. We got the proof, Anders. We got the proof.
Exactly. We got him.
So the thing they wanted to talk about, and I thought this was an interesting topic, the Swedish Counter-Strike scene in 2020, which obviously will be Christopher's area of expertise for sure. But I have to say, obviously, it's the former powerhouse region, right the way through CS. At various points, Swedish players have sort of dominated the scene, been the best in the world. Christopher's one of them who's been among that number. But just in recent times, it does feel that they've fallen into that area where I think the French scene was in maybe a year or two ago, where they're recycling talent now rather than producing new talent. All of these names that were being touted as being, having so much potential don't seem to have realized that potential. And there's one name in particular, because I'll remind you of a conversation we had over a beer, Christopher, where you told me that you felt Disco Doppelin was going to be like, because you played with him, you felt he was going to be like the next great breakout, teammate.
We're talking like 4 years ago or something, I'm guessing,
Yeah. But I mean, even so, I would expect Christopher to have that magic eye, and that kind of assessment, made me pay close attention. So I'll start with you on this, Christopher. What has been going on with the Swedish scene in 2020 and maybe even a little bit further back than that?
I mean, it's been going downhill. That's the honest, straight off answer. I think I think Golden has been talking about it a little bit vocally as well. The Swedish scene has come to the point where I feel like there's other things that sticks out and more interesting than becoming a professional player. That's why when I look into the grassroots problem, like the biggest issue with the Swedish Counter-Strike is that people see like making money and becoming famous is something more interesting than actually becoming a star in a professional game. That's how I look at it, because I know there's so many talents out there, at least through the years, where I've been like, my eyebrows have been like up in there, and I'm really like, okay, this is actually people actually can be, like for example this with Upland. I think that he actually had a fortunate career in itself, so that's the answer I will give to that, at least as a player, at least. But there's been other players through the years where you'd be like, okay, this actually has a chance, and like this is a person actually can be doing something. Like Fnatic took that chance at least before when they brought in Golden Electro, for example, so they came into the scene. But what happened after that when you really look into it? Res went into NIP, Draken came into NIP, for example. Things didn't go back to the glory days of Sweden, if you say it like that. Like when you have like the biggest name of the teams, you have the biggest brands, and you're like the biggest teams, that's always going to be the top 3 finishing, feels like. I don't know, maybe it's just because of the recycling thing. Yeah, surely, and they've been very supportive of me, for example, and other players, which is awesome for me. But at the end of the day, I think it's just more finally has come to the point when in 2020, when you look back in NIP especially, that's like they're gonna do change if it's necessary and they feel like it's the right one, even though people may be questioning it time to time. When they removed Lekro, for example, and brought in Hampus, and you actually saw improvement in NIP, but it wasn't that improvement that you were expecting, at least. Or I felt that to the point when I was looking at NIP, like, okay, now it actually seems like they're coming somewhere and actually becoming a strong team. And it goes better and better when you look at it, but it's not there yet, it feels like. I think it's just needing a little bit more time, for example. And then now Fnatic has just done their, apparently, rooster change as well. It's going to be interesting to see that. I don't know the player, though, they're going to take in, so I have no idea about that. But there is more and more stars if you look into it. And if you look into the Swedish scene itself, we have like some sort of a league that's called Elite Series, and I don't know the English word for it. But
Elite Series, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
Elite Series.
Exactly like that. But there is players that actually stands out, and you see they're actually fighting to becoming a professional gamer, and that that makes me happier to see for the growth of the scene, especially for CS, because it has a huge history, a rich history in a lot of games, not just CS.
Sure.
So for me, I think in 2021, when you look forward to that, I think there's going to be more names that we have never heard about before. And I think you guys have to be messaging someone like me or someone else later on, like, who is this person? Maybe I will give you an explanation, or maybe I'm also being like, oh, I don't even know myself, because I haven't paying that close attention because of through the last couple of years when I haven't seen anyone come into the team. So through the years, I don't know what really happened. It's just been like, the organization being standing put by the players and really supporting them through through the years. But now when you come into the point, especially me now, when I'm being more older and more mature, maybe should have been using, the shopping block a little bit more earlier, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mixture of the two, because as Get Right says, it makes perfect sense. If you had this golden age, which lasted a long time, it was basically like the first 4 or 5 years of CS:GO, where always Sweden had like 2 teams. Like you're saying, France was the other one. Like, these were the 2 countries that always had 2 teams in the top 10, usually the top 5 if things were going awesome. So like the idea that like realistically, Fnatic was the only one that sort of did it in the last, like, not even 2020, but like in 2019 and early 2020, they were still pretty good when it was like LAN period. And let's be real. You look at that team, the reason why is they were the only ones who found the next Swedish superstar. They found Brolan. Everyone else had these players. Back in the day, it was Disco Doppler, it was Drake, and maybe Rez when he was in NIP, or Lekro, or in the modern day, Nork, Plopsky. The problem is, though, these players were all good or have become good, but they're not like classic Olofmeister, Get Right and Forest. They're not like the old school greats. Because the idea is, if you're the best Swedish player, you should automatically in CS history be like contender for best in the world. Whereas like we were having a discussion earlier about where's Brolan in the Simple versus Ewu. It just wasn't even a factor. So unfortunately, that kind of like that's a sign, I think, of the issues they've had. And the reason I find it weird is that's why I'm always interested when I speak to Swedish people like Get Right to find out if it is something cultural. Because the weird thing about it is, if people don't know the history of the game, even though Sweden had all those amazing teams in 1.6, just like a lot of the rest of the industry, as a country, it was super stratified. Like you had NIP, SK, Fnatic, depending on what years we're talking about, usually 2 to 3 big orgs. But if you aren't on those 3 teams, forget playing pro Counter-Strike. Your only chance is to go to Swedish lands and try and beat those teams and get into them. So what's crazy is you had way less opportunity in 1.6, but way more people going crazy to try and get that opportunity. And just to get into SK would be a massive deal. Like that. Forget even winning a tournament. Just getting onto one of those teams was like a life goal for some people. But as Get Right says, like there are other avenues where you can do these things now. Yeah. So I feel like that's somehow sort of like, it's not the same dream for people for some reason.
I mean, if I can just slide in for 1 second there. I mean, it took me literally 5 years to get the big breakout in Fnatic. And I had a couple of years through there before, and Thorin knows that specifically. Like, it took me 5 years. I don't see, like, how can I motivate a person to take the same route that I did, for example? It's gonna be pretty hard, right? Like, especially nowadays when you can be a streamer, you can be a content creator, you can do, playing a lot of other games, you can be trying different things than just becoming a professional gamer. But if you ask me personally, I will do it any given day again. I think that one of the biggest also issues that we have is that older players like myself hasn't teach the newer ones. I think that's also one of the big problems that we have, because I don't see myself as a teacher, so I don't think I'm the right person for the job. And I always said that I knew through my whole career I've teach one person, and he paid me, I don't know what it was, 500 euros or something to teach him CS. I gave him back the money after 45 minutes. I said I did a terrible job. For example, I don't feel like myself as a teacher. That's my biggest weakness. So because if I want to see the
JW, no, whatever, keep going.
I will never mention his name. He can go out if he wants to. Sadly, he never made it. So, but it would have been cool, because then he could have said it afterwards. Actually, Get Right did this one thing one time. I paid him money, better give it back, because he felt embarrassed by doing so, or not steal the money or whatever, or what he said. Whatever he thinks, whatever. I think that's one of the biggest problems. The older players need to give and show the way for the newer ones somehow. And Fnatic is probably the only team who actually done that in a way. Like we tried to in NIP, for example, but it never went down to the right path, it felt like.
Anything to add to that, Semmler? Obviously, you're a Swedish resident, right? Aren't you?
I mean,
You're Swedish adjacent.
Sure, I am. I mean, to me, it always just comes back to whether or not we're doing the right thing by stopping these local lands, I guess.
Yeah.
That's always going to be it. Actually, it's funny. I was in Uppsala earlier today, and the last time I was in Uppsala was for Birdie, I think is what it's called, the land, right?
Classic.
Birdie, yeah.
You know, so, and that was like years ago. That's where Anders and I have that picture where it's like I'm casting and Anders is like a picture on a stick next to me, right? Because he had to team speak in because no budget to fly him in from Denmark back then, right? So I mean, I was just kind of wondering about that. That's listening to Chris talk. That's what's making me wonder, right? Okay, what about all these little lands where you would actually be able to have those moments to show what you're capable of locally and get that chance to go up, kind of like what Duncan was talking about, where you had to beat those teams.
So let's talk about big roster moves in 2020. You know, we've obviously not a lot of them involved Swedish teams, but there was some real big power plays meant to, consolidate, dynastic power among a few of the big name orgs out there. So who do we think made the best roster move in 2020?
Astralis coming back to the original 5. No, is that not what we were aiming for?
I like that though. I do like that
That's not
because
what we
it
were
goes
aiming
to
for.
show that but some of these moves have been absolutely disastrous.
Yeah,
as
most
well.
of them have.
Yeah, there's no getting away from that. I mean, look, I'll just toss one into the ring. G2 signing Nico.
It's probably the best one. I think,
Pretty big ball move, right?
I mean, it's Carlos though from G2. Are you expecting anything less from him?
Exactly.
He's gonna do big signing. Come on, like just look at League of Legends. Come on.
Yeah.
Silly, reckless. Come on.
He had a productive year. He had a productive year with that entire organization.
Sure.
Actually, didn't they won Org of the Year, didn't they? So
Yes.
I think so.
just making plays, those guys.
The thing with that move is, like, that one ticks all the boxes. Like, it really is one of the absolute best players in the world. Still really good. It's not like he was bad and left. Leaving another, in theory, top team. Like, there was still a top 10 team at the time. I think he left. In fact, they won that tournament on the way out the door. And going to another team, one that's got an interesting storyline, obviously, with like him coming to the other people from like the Balkan region, etc. And then I can't say it like it wasn't like it worked out perfectly. They didn't win the tournaments, but they still looked very good in the first tournaments. And like he at least individually has, if not played better, arguably. So like most of the boxes you want to check on that one, pretty good. Like if you're on the G2 side of the equation, you're still liking that move, even though it definitely was expensive.
Yeah, but it didn't necessarily equate to instant greatness. I mean, that's something. I mean, I think when you announce a signing like Nico, I think everyone expected, well, that's it. G2 are now going to challenge the Vitalities, the Navis, the Astralises. There wasn't a lot of tournaments to get up and running, but there was enough to maybe say that overall the move perhaps didn't quite live up to the promise.
Is that so? Come on. I think like.
Hey, I'm just a host making conversation.
No, the angle he means, though, get right, is he doesn't mean like as a player. He just means like if you spend potentially millions, we'll just say that as a vehicle. If you spend millions on a player like Nico, you are kind of doing it to try and win the next tournaments. Like, that's really the reason you do it. Like you're not going to make that money back off him in the short term, are you?
I mean, sure, but then at the same time, it doesn't really matter if you're gonna hire like the best player in whatever X game it is. It's gonna be instantly success if you ask me. Like in my head, it's not a reality. Like that's never gonna happen. It's gonna need a couple of tournaments or a couple of months. Not too long though, surely, because if it's gonna be a 6 months, 8 months period of time, then you understand how it's gonna go, But like, I think we got little too less time to see the new G2 lineup with Nico in the form. But then at the same time, seeing Nico going back to his older form shows a very promising future, if you ask me. Like, I know that they've been, struggling for time there, when they had Jackson team and all that kind of stuff, and that was like the issue with the language barrier time to time as well, because Jackson English wasn't the best what I heard from. But like seeing a player like Nico finally plays with a cousin, it excites me for 2021, like in general. Like I'm not gonna, say already now they're gonna be instantly the best team in the world in 2021. but I can see a potential that's going to happen.
I've got one for you. I was trying to rack my head to think of a good one.
I've been quickly bringing them up here, so
yeah.
I have got some. Yeah.
Here's a good one for you, because it's one that'll be a bit low-key. Obviously, I referenced earlier, at one point in time, Heroic was the #1 team in the world. And at the time, that was super unexpected because they lost Essetang, because Snappy, their former IGL, was gone for the team. So actually, you would have expected they would collapse in the summer. But the key move they made was that when they got that guy Tesses from Copenhagen Flames. Because basically, it wasn't long after that, they immediately just went to the top of the rankings. Like, they were in all the semis and the finals. They were winning. It's not like he was like, a simple level player, but clearly it worked as a move. If we were contrasting it against the Swedish example earlier, where they've had a hard time finding like the next talents and bringing them up, this guy got fast tracked to the top really quick. It was just last year. Like, he was nobody before that. I barely ever saw him play in 2019.
On January 1st, probably the best roster move of the year was made, literally on the first day of the year, and it was Searson joining Big.
Okay. Yeah.
Now if that's not one, first of all, what a find that player is.
Sure.
He's absolutely outrageous. I think he's made the top 10 HLTV this year. Which is, I mean, I never thought you would see a German player ever again anywhere near those rankings. We all know, with the exception of the players who played on Big, German CS has been a bit of a joke for a long time, considering other games like Source, for example, where they were a force online.
Well, VAC has gotten better over the years, right, Richard?
So,
and obviously in 1.6 they were one of the great nations as well, just below the Nordic region.
Obviously that Great Mouse Sports team and everything else. But, I'll say Searson joining is what essentially revamped the big roster and slowly over the course of the year made them relevant. And he's a player who's got better and better and has had some incredible performances in big games against big teams. Now, obviously, the asterisk is always they haven't necessarily been LAN performances because of the ongoing COVID situation. But he's a player in 2021 I'm absolutely hyped to see at LAN. If he replicates what he does, we're definitely going to be talking about him. And the only other player I could think of, Semmler, before we come to your meme one, that might be in contention would be Masuta, who joined Vitality this year.
Yeah, that's a valid one, for sure.
I mean, the Nevera move was a pretty good move as well, even though obviously they use them in a weird way. Like, actually, Vitality's made some pretty good moves across the board.
Like, if you look on that team, I think this whole new thing with 6-man lineup thing, they made, the best one if you look. Like, if you look at the paper and if you ask anyone. Like, when they brought in Masuta, losing Alex, all that kind of stuff, it was a question mark. Apex becoming game leader, I wasn't really keen on it, but then at the same time, it's different when you're inside of a team, and you should, trust their judgment in the end of the day, if you ask me. But as a person, as a viewer, and as a fan, I wasn't really expecting, good things. But then, when they brought in Nevera, you see Masuta finally pops up like big time and showing off his true colors. Now we were talking, like that kind of thing with Vitality. Surely it doesn't surely it helps them a lot when they have a player like Cyber in the team. And, RPK, time and time again, when he's, a CT player, he's just popping off, But, seeing that mixture with a 6-man lineup like that was like one of the biggest highlights, if you ask me, like with the teams in general.
Zeus joining Evil Geniuses was actually, like, at this point, a forgotten move. Because remember, that team was at death's door. Like, they were never making the finals of the NA tournament. They weren't winning any of them. And there was, like, rumors I'd heard that, like, Stanislaw might get caught. Some of the players might leave. Throughout the year, some of those players were available. So the fact that Zeus came in, obviously from, like, the failed MIGR project at the time, they won those 3 tournaments in a row. They had all these win streaks. Like, it didn't end that great at the end of the year. They sort of cooled off a bit, especially when they came to Europe. But, like, he might have actually also saved that team and kept them in CS. Because think about the discussion we were having earlier about that team saying, like, we're going to at least, like, vaguely commit to staying in CS. If that team just bottoms out in the summer and just is like, average to bad, and they're coming, like, 7th to 8th in NA tournaments, that's where an org maybe does just say, right, forget it. We're out. We're done now.
Yeah.
That's right. That's a fair point. The one that I wanted to, and it's a bit of a meme, but it's also, I mean, to be fair, it really revitalized my interest in the team towards the latter part of the year, was MIBR ditching Fallen Taco and Fur.
Okay.
Right?
Technically, they already ditched for.
You want to be careful, Semmler.
To be fair,
Fallen has it in for you every time you say anything vaguely
Fallen
critical.
has it in for everybody, dude. I don't get how that works. Like, he legit just sicks his fans on people, and it's like, okay, cool, he's a great guy, I guess. But as far as the server is concerned,
get him, Slay, Queen, Slay, get him.
No. Like, I think that was actually probably one of the greatest joys towards the end of the year, was to see the revitalization of that roster. KNG coming into his own as the leader of that team, the young talents really shining there as well, a real threat against top tier teams towards the end.
It's gone. It's gone.
I was gonna get to that one, but for a brief
Hashtag free
period,
VSM.
for a
Hashtag
brief
free
period there,
VSM.
You know, it was a real joy to watch. It was really cool. It was exciting CS. They really did bring it to the table, and it was really exciting to watch. So, you know, for a second there, it was great.
Sure.
Now obviously, you know, it all kind of fell apart. But for a brief moment there, I was really excited about that roster change. It was pretty cool.
Now, there is a little note here just talking about NACSGO. I think we touched on it pretty well earlier. I don't know if there's anything to really add. I guess the question becomes, in 2021, if we get over the hump of the pandemic and the world goes back to some semblance of normality, will we see those orgs start picking up players again? Will people flock back to NACSGO? Or are we just going to have to move forward with a continent completely sort of missing from the world landscape?
You know what? Being as Moses normally when he's on all these shows always references that period in 1.6 where CGS happened and all the top talent went, and then basically, if people don't know, the majority of them just never came back. Like the Evil Geniuses people did, like Fraud and those guys, but that was like a rare example. Most of them just stayed in Source or just retired flat out because they just went from such a drop in like living standard. One of the problems I have at the moment is we've actually done the opposite. We've kept the top talent, but what I do worry about for the future years is I think you're only going to see the impact of this year 2 years down the line. Because think of some of the names that did go to Valorant who hadn't yet become the player they might be, the Wardells, Tens, or Som, all these players who they were like a couple of years from maybe being some of the best players in the world. So I think that's the killer for me, is like, luckily NA is such a massive region. They're still going to have people coming in the scene, but you can't afford to lose too many of like your newer talents. You need to, everyone has to have as many chances as they can, because it's kind of a lottery. You never know who's going to make it. Like you can't just hope that one guy tracks every year improvement on improvement on improvement. Whereas if you had like 20 guys like that, you had all the Triumph guys, the Chaos guys, some of the people who were in those like the FNS type pickup teams at Flashpoint 1. These players, I actually thought some of them were like maybe a year away from being really good. So I am a bit worried in the future about like the up and coming players. And then luckily we kept the top players at least.
Who was it that tweeted the other day the matchmaking server? Did you guys see that? The matchmaking server population worldwide? Yeah, it was Maui. Dude, Maui's been on fire these days. Damn.
What was the difference between it? What was the key?
No, the key.
Wild, right?
Did you remember that? Like, you remember that, Richard, where he was talking about how like US West is like the third least popular region of all servers. And it's like, it's reminded me a little bit of what we were talking about earlier with Get Right, where, you know, like what's going on with Scandinavia, or like Sweden, but it's Scandinavia. Because I mean, EU North is still the dominant region in terms of matchmaking servers. Like by far the most players seem to be active in EU North. It's still EU Northwest and East, but like EU North are up there, right? So
to put it in context, from the numbers that Maui Snake tweeted out, there were more active players playing matchmaking in Dubai than there was on the whole US
Holy
West.
moly.
What?
Yeah.
It's 3,440. Like the population playing matchmaking at X time. To be fair, he went at like, well, I don't know. He's in Hawaii. Who knows about his time zones?
No, he lives in LA, mate.
Yeah.
Was he in LA when he did this?
I'm not sure now.
You think he was just like rolling with Dog the Bounty Hunter down in Hawaii, like, you know?
No, but I'm just thinking time zones, because if he's like, oh, it's, you know, it's like midnight here in Hawaii, but who knows what time it is over in Europe, you know, US West. If he's doing this at 2 a.m. US West, well, maybe that explains why, you know, the numbers look the way they do. But I think the main thing he's trying to point out is that you're not really having that matchmaking population in the US right now, and maybe that's what we need to be focusing on, is getting more people involved there than anything else, because obviously that's where your next crop of pros is coming from. It's coming from the player base.
Well, I mean, you know, again, in that snapshot as well, I mean, remember how the narrative has been, oh, we failed to get into Asia. You know, we haven't captured hearts and minds out there. But, you know, if you look at these numbers, loads of people playing in China right now. You know, loads of people playing in Singapore and Hong Kong, Japan even. Japan with like 5 times, I think, as many US West players in matchmaking. Again, if you told me that was the statistics, I'd say you'd been at the gin. I wouldn't believe you. You know, so I think there is an issue moving forward where I do think, I know the V word is becoming a bit taboo on CS shows because it seems to be something we focus on a lot. I do think in America, you know, like Valorant is perhaps the game that is the FPS of choice for them for the foreseeable future, unless CSGO can do something to bring back.
That's also super disconcerting in the context that, in the same way as we pointed out, there used to be a very, very vibrant Swedish grassroots scene of LANs that actually connected to the pro scene. In America, it was the same. Like, the reason why that's so shocking to me is because you said West Coast, dude. Like, I could maybe believe that, like, somewhere in the middle, you know, no one playing. Dude, the idea that West Coast isn't playing. In the early days of 1.6, they used to have so many LANs at LAN cafes, like LAN tournaments in NorCal and SoCal, that they eventually used to make rules where you weren't even allowed to play if you were actually like an invite level player, because they wanted to give like room for all these players who were coming to compete. And that was the way that so many talents came up and then joined the invite level in the top teams, you know. So like the idea there's 3,000 people in that entire area playing, that's depressing.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, there is one. I mean, it makes me wonder in terms of like, oh, Valorant is this big bogeyman. My personal experience was I had no idea with MOBAs, right? So this is just like put things in context, right? Like I had no idea about MOBAs, and the first MOBA that I ran into was League of Legends, even before I even knew Dota was a thing, right? So I, you know, League of Legends, played that. Okay, cool, this is interesting, and then somebody's like, well, you know, why don't you try the harder version? It's like, what, the harder version? What do you mean the harder version? And then it was like, oh, Dota, and then I sunk, you know, hours and hours into Dota, and that was it, because it was like, that's the real game. You're going to have that kind of bleed coming in from Valorant as well, where people were never exposed to FPS. They're going to see Valorant and they're going to be like, wait, hold on, there's this other game that's harder, that, you know, like this is where the real shit is. They're going to go over there. They're going to want to see it. They're going to want to try it. And you could have that cross-pollination that, of course, Riot is never going to want, but like it is going to happen. And I'm curious if that unlocks another tier for us, right?
Well, there's two more topics left before we wrap up. So we can segue nicely. I mean, based on those numbers and everything we're talking about, you know, where do we think CS is headed in 2021? I have had my views. I kind of blew up a little bit again in at the end of 2020 because I had a stream where I basically listed all of the problems facing the competitive scene. Understand, I don't think the game is going to die, but I am an esports person, so the game is a conduit essentially for what we do. So I believe in the game's popularity. It's an incredible format that's endured for over 2 decades now. What I'm talking about is simply the competitive scene. And having been around lots of other competitive scenes, my worry is we're starting to see that chain of dominoes start to drop. This is very reminiscent of StarCraft 2. For people who followed that. Very reminiscent.
Oh, I want to hear this point then, because okay. How?
Yeah. So, well, first of all, there was a lack of, very much like what happened with Brood War before it, a lack of belief in the validity of the games, because we've all moved to online. And if you go and look at the end of StarCraft, where things like match fixing and stream sniping and whatnot was becoming more and more relevant, more and more prevalent, that's happening in CS a lot more, unfortunately, with more of it to come and more names to be out.
Sure. Okay. On that point, for sure. Yeah.
And then on top of that, we've also got this thing where, remember, that by the virtue of not doing region locking in StarCraft, we ended up with people not there's no American players in the late stages of a tournament. There's a tournament every weekend, but no names I can really cheer for. So while we don't have region locking per se, or rather a lack of region locking, what we've got is, by all of the global factors that happen, we have lost that North American scene. Let's look at some of the names we have lost. Nitro going out while he was in-game leader at Team Liquid to go and play for 100 days. This is not a small and insignificant move. Nitro still had juice in the tank. He could have
There was people who would have wanted him as well.
Yeah,
I guarantee he would have been picked up.
Absolutely.
Yeah, agreed.
So we have lost, obviously Steel has his own problems and peccadillos, but I think that matters less and less moving forward. He proved himself to be an incredible in-game leader that continually got value from his players. He left to go and pursue a new game. Obviously, all those big personalities that are going over to Valorant, they're driving the NA audience over there. And honestly, it's like Duncan says, with StarCraft, StarCraft 2, it wasn't a global game at the end. You couldn't call it that. It was the preserve of Koreans and just genuine game enthusiasts and esports fans. My worry is with Counter-Strike, because we've lost that region, we're going to head down a similar route where we don't even have an NA audience. What will that do to viewing numbers? So
Okay.
So there's just two of the big parallels I see immediately. There's some.
I've got one thing to throw out, and I'm normally not the person who would say this because, like, my history, obviously, I used to be the most hardcore. Like, I only cared about the game and the best players and the best team. And if you're anyone else who gives a fuck, but I will say this. I'll harp on something that people reference, but last year especially, it was so noticeable. Which is, if you're trying to think, if I'm a big org, so we're not talking about the chaoses of the world that maybe couldn't afford the operating costs. Let's say we're talking about the big orgs that have the teams in Overwatch or League of Legends or Valorant, and so they clearly have the money, but they're going to choose not to be involved in CSGO. I'll tell you what, three reasons off the top of my head right now as to why I would agree with them. Number one, I pay the players a king's ransom of a salary and they do no content for me. What? Yep. They only play the game. Like, dude, playing the game doesn't pay the bills. Like, that can't be it. Like, remember, half the complaints in games like LCS and League of Legends is, oh, you're just keeping this guy around for, like, Twitter followers and content because he's popular. It's like, mate, CSGO orgs wish they could get people to do content like that. Like, players will only play the game mostly. Secondly, there's the factor that players have had all this cheating scandal and stuff like that. Wouldn't give me great inspiration if I was an org to pick up some of these people, you know. I'd be thinking, but they're going to do the same again in 6 months. I know it's not as simple as that, but that ties into the match fixing angle you were talking about before. That is essentially it in the Korean scene in StarCraft. Once a few people who were really good players match fixed, it did call into question a lot of the integrity of the scene, or like, what is even the point of this? Like, is this even a sport? Is it just some BS where people are doing little kid stuff? And then the third angle I would say is, it's like you said before, it's like this has become like it's gone from being like a campfire story of like, imagine a game came along that was like CS, but a different and now it's become like, it's an everyday thing. Like, every day something happens. So even though it's not like a black and white night and day thing, it's not over. Certainly, more and more the momentum builds up that something is going to happen in that regard.
I would say just like this, every point that you're saying, every description, I mean, I agree to the like fullest what you guys are saying, and I don't think I would say anything better. But the only thing I could say like this, there's a reason why CS has been here the whole fucking time. The loyalty of the community, the loyalty of the people, and being here through everything, like through the mud and through everything. And like, there is something with CS that I don't think anyone else can really answer on, but there is something about CS that people still get excitement from.
Yes.
And there's something that's never going to fade out. Like, surely, maybe I'll be looking like an idiot in 1 year time and we're all sitting here, okay, Chris maybe said something really stupid here. But come on, I don't see it going anywhere, if you ask me.
No,
if it's gonna be like, surely, player base, that's always going to be there. That's nothing. I'm meaning the competitor scene. I mean this sort of thing.
Yeah.
Exactly, that's the same thing. But like, when you look about it, with Valorant being here, breathing neck to neck with CS because they're basically the game that's going to be taking over what everyone is saying. No, I'm saying like this is just a perfect opportunity to take it to the next level, if you ask me.
Yeah, if people don't know, basically, like, I would like rephrase what Get Right saying there. Is something I've always said, which is like, people who play CS, it's not even just that they're loyal, like, they're just CS players. That's what they do. Like, they might play other games for fun, but when they play competitively, they just play CS. Think about how people complain. They don't complain like, wow, this game's stale and really old. They're like, Valve, give us one new map every 3. Can we have one new map? Like, that's all we need in CS. We don't even ask for much. Like, we'll play Inferno for the rest of history. We'll play it for 30 more years. Like, if you think of 1.6, right? People don't know this. 1.6 didn't die. It was killed. Literally, IEM and a bunch of people just said, like, we want to go to CSGO, and even then, we're not sure if that's going to take off, so we'll sort of see. So we'll just essentially withdraw all the support from CS 1.6. The point is, like, you can't really kill CS, in my opinion, because there's just such a grassroots element, and there's so many people who it just is life to them. Like, that's just esports to them. They don't follow every other esport. People who follow CS, I feel like, I know there's a lot of crossover in terms of, like, other games. Like, I know a lot of League of Legends people I know watch CS, etc. But I don't feel like it goes as much the other way. I think people who are CS people are just CS people. So I agree with Get Right. I don't think anything can really kill CS in the long run.
Right. And like you're saying already, like, you know, everyone plays other games, and you need to also appreciate that, because at the end of the day, it's a competition between the games. And if you see it's going to still be here for the huge issue that we're having right now, it needs to have a competitor, someone stepping on our toes and making us angry and actually take a stand.
There you go. Yeah.
So this is time for the final thoughts, guys, to round off the show. What do you think we're going to see in 2021? It can be a change that you think we'll see. It can be a change that you'd like to see. It can be optimistic. Well, whatever it is, what do you think 2021 is going to bring for CSGO that we haven't had in 2020 or before?
Okay, I'll just bring it out there. Maybe it'll become a meme, or maybe it doesn't. But I think Swedish CS is going to come back.
Oof. Okay. Very brave. Very bold. I like it.
I mean, I love CS. I love CS. There's nothing that's going to change that. I'm always going to be a believer at the end of the day. If I'm going to be one of those maniacs now and joining that kind of gang, let it be. I'm going to join that gang. No question asked. I mean, come on. Anders has been waiting for Markov for forever now. He's still waiting.
He's still waiting.
To be fair, like that is one aspect
time.
we didn't consider about the Swedish scene. Listen, we were talking generally, like, you know, the last 5 years of the players coming up. But to be fair, one of the reasons also I think the Swedish scene the last year probably wasn't great is it's no joke, like, LAN was the way CS was played there because the ping was so low. So you can imagine CS pros when they have to play every game with like 20 ping. They're like, what is it? I cannot play like fifth. And they're like, mate, like 20 pings, like a dream if you're from CIS region, isn't it? Like, is it online plays a different world? Don't edit out that fake Swedish swear I did just there. Straight.
It's pretty good.
It was pretty good, actually.
It was all right. I did it. It's all right.
You're getting better. You're broadening your your accent repertoire. I like it.
Well, the French,
just
they
the
weren't that good
French.
for the last few years,
Now
so
we're starting to explore the Swedish. I mean, I don't think it happens in the beginning of the year. I think we're still going to be all in lockdown, and that's just the way it's going to be because people are so scared. But like by the middle of the year, I reckon we have lands back, and that's my thing because I'm so fed up. I mean, it's like Duncan was saying. I was just ready to start kicking people out of tournaments. Like, oh, okay, cool, you're cheating, cool, get out. Like, get out. There's the door, and don't come back. You know, like just done because we need to preserve.
Swayze in Roadhouse, he just rocked up to try and clean house.
I was just
no one
ready.
ever won a fight. Now
I have to send Monty.
You're too stupid to have a good time.
I really have to apologize to Monty because he was so patient with me when all that was happening because I was just raging at him and he was so patient. So I gotta give him that. But like, no, the reality is that we will get back on land and that will restore some. That will work against some of what you were talking about there, Richard, with like the brood war and the match fixing. This is a year where it's just like, okay, we took our shots and it's all going to get better in 2021. We're going to get that land back on action. Once we're back on land, then we can have the real discussions again about who's the best, who's not, and we're going to get right back in action and it's going to just flow along. So to me, that's the real positive thing to be looking forward to right now.
All right. Well, look, guys, it's been a pleasure, as always. We don't get to hang out very much in these crazy times, so it's been a joy to talk to you all. And now we're going to
say it in a Swedish word first? Enjoy, enjoy, or whatever you're saying.
Yeah, pure joy.
Pure joy. Pure joy.
It's been pure joy. Shout out to Pronax. But look, we are going to round out the show now. And just before we leave, we've got this special video from PGL.